our speaker for this particular program, this seminar, or this series of meetings. I have known Dr. Pandit for many years. I first heard of him. I was listening to 3ABN way back. I think it was in the year 2006, and it was just a cursory glance. I was just passing, and I heard him being interviewed on 3ABN, and I said, wow, I think I need to hear more of this particular individual, but we never actually I never made any follow-up until many years later when I was pastoring Leeds district, and we were looking for, speakers. And I said, you know what? I do remember us having, I remember me hearing of this particular speaker. And I can't remember how I went about trying to find his details, and we managed to make a breakthrough. We got Dr. Pandit to come and do, I think it was a 2-week seminar, if it's not 1 whole week seminar at Leeds, where he was covering this topic of God. Absolutely amazing. I am sure that you all will be blessed. Now, I would like to say to you that not only is Dr. Pandit, he comes from a medical background, so you will see a lot of that in his speaking, but he's well-read. Coming from a country with more than 1 million gods, of course, was born as an Adventist, but he decided that he was going to search out this truthfulness of God by himself. And as he takes you through that journey, I have read many, I have followed many particular apologists like, the late Ravi Zacharias and Nabil Qureshi and all the others. But Dr. Pandit's method is unique. I can tell you that I think it was in 2012 or 13 when we brought him to Leeds. And I have brought him after about 3-4 other times, because there's just not enough of him. And on top of that, I carry his audiobook in my car, where I just listen over and over and over again. You will find his arguments simple yet riveting. He's well-read, he's well-researched in the area of atheism, evolution. And I am sure, especially college or university students, you are going to love it. And I hope and pray that at the end of it all, that through all of this interaction, you will find your purpose and your meaning in God, because that is exactly what I found at the end of this seminar. I'm so excited to have you back, Dr. Pandit. I want to thank all you organizers that made it possible. I think when the church approached me looking for someone to answer this, I said, you know what? I know no other person save Dr. Pandit, and I believe you'll not be disappointed to have him with you this evening. Back to you, Brother Smith, and I wish all of you the very best as you begin this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Ikwisa. Without much ado, we'll just leave the event for Dr. Pandit, to take over and then carry on. Whilst we're waiting, you are reminded that the link for the question has been put in the chat. So you can refer to the chat for the link for the questions, and you can now type in any questions that you have regarding any of the things that we'll be having today. So today's session is the first one that we would be having. Is God for real? The general principles. So we want to know if God exists. So we'll be discussing things that has to do with the existence of God.
Hello.
Hi, Doctor. Welcome.
Am I on? I can't hear.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
All right. So do we continue then?
Yes, please. Take it.
All right. Thank you very much. So here we start. I'll do my share screen, and that's where we will stay. for the presentation. Here we go. That's the title. Is God for real? And let's reason it out. The main thing that we want to do is reason it out. So here's the seminar from the next 15 days, and I would really like to see if you can stay with me. It will be something that will be really good. So, Pastor Equisa, thank you for your words of introduction. Just a little bit more of introduction. I'm from India, land of tremendous diversity, not only language, culture, food, but also religion. It has the largest Hindu population in the world, more than 800 million. We also have the largest Muslim, second largest Muslim population in the world. We have more Muslims in India than the whole Arabian Peninsula put together. Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi, Yemen, put them all together, we have more Muslims in India. It's also the place where Buddhism was born. And there's Sikhism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism in the same city where I lived. So it's from that background of tremendous diversity that I come. Number two, I am a survivor of advanced cancer. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed, and then I underwent treatment, and it came to remission. And just this week, I went back for my final check with the oncologist, and he had told me on the phone that he might have to do a PET scan to check it out, at the end as well. So we went there, and he checked me out and looked at the numbers and physically examined me, and then he looked at me and said, "Man, this is a little unusual, but I have to tell you, I don't find any reason even to do the PET scan. It's okay." God has placed me in a position where we can say, all right, we have pushed the cancer down to a level that the doctor can't see. And so let's just carry on. A blessing from God. Don't you think I'd be happy? Of course. But there are others who are also diagnosed who didn't make it. So what's the difference? I don't know what the difference is. I really don't. But this much I know, that if I am here, past that stage, then there has to be a purpose.
Sorry, Dr. Pandit.
Yes.
We are getting a feedback. Can you hear? Do you hear
I hear you very clearly.
Yeah, when you're speaking, we are getting like a whistling sound. I don't know if you're able to log back and log back in again.
All right, let me log out.
Okay.
There you go.
Don't know if technicians are around. They're able to.
Moment.
as you're waiting for him to sign back in, I just want you to know that Dr. Pandit has a book that he's written. Actually, it's 2 books. They're also available on audio books. We have a few at the conference. If you're interested, after Sabbath, you can get in touch with me. The ones that I've got at the conference are just the audio books, but then he does have 2 companion books that go with his lectures that are available. They are excellent material for those of you that would be interested in further reading or further research. But yeah, Kelly, I think just watch out for him. I don't know whether he's been able to log back in.
Yes, I still have my eye on the participants list. So
Okay.
Are we there?
Oh,
Yes.
much better. Yes.
Yeah, there was something wrong with my computer. I had to turn it off.
Oh, wow. Much better. Much clearer now. Clean. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
Please wait till I make you the host, co-host, please, so that you can share your screen.
Say that again, please.
He's trying to make
I
you
have to make you
co-host.
co-host so that you can share your screen. So hold on a minute.
Dr. Pandit, do you have a camera? Would you be because people are asking, they wanted to see you.
It's done now. You are now the co-host. You can share your screen.
Yeah, I'm on my camera.
No, we only seen your photo. We are not seeing you.
What do? I let me see. Here we go.
Oh, great.
Oh, there you. Oh, wow. There you go. Okay, that's better. All right, over to you, Doctor.
Shall we start again? Or shall we carry on from where we were?
I think you start
It's
again.
better
Yeah,
to
I
start.
think it starts again.
A lot of noise.
All right, let's start again. So, thank you, Dr. Pastor Ikwisa, for those words of welcome. And let's just carry on with what we are doing. So the title of the seminar is God for Real? Let's reason it out. The main thing with us to be convinced is to be able to reason it out, and that's what we're going to do. Now, about myself, I come from India, a land of tremendous diversity of language, culture, food, and also religion. India has the largest Hindu population in the world. 800 million Hindus live in India. We also have the second largest Muslim population in the world. We have more Muslims in India than the whole Arabian Peninsula put together. You know, Jordan, Amman, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Saudi, Yemen, Qatar, Kuwait, all put together, we have more Muslims in India. Buddhism was born in India. We have Jainism, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism. So that crucible is amazing, and that's where I came from. The second point is that I'm a survivor of advanced cancer. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and then I took treatment, and it remitted. And then just this last week, I went to the doctor to have my final check, and he said, I might need to do another PET scan, a whole body PET scan, after I see you. So when I went to him, he saw me, examined me, looked at all the numbers and his documents, and he looked at me and said, this is unusual, but really I don't find any reason to even do the PET scan. It's over. We have to just watch it now. So I'll see you once in a year and let's see what happens. Thank God. Naturally, I'm happy. But what happened to the others also who were diagnosed? Many of them didn't make it. So what's the difference between them and me? I'm no better than anybody else. So why should I be here? Whatever reason may be given, there's one thing that becomes clear. If a person has been left alive, then there has to be a reason, a purpose. And I really believe that this ministry of mine with this seminar is one of the big purposes. It has really pushed me in my life and let me stand strong and sturdy. And so the third point that's on the screen is that I'm passionate about this. And I'm extremely pleased that the organizers did invite me to present this to you. Every one of you who's listening is very precious as an individual. And so I considered a real privilege to be able to speak to you. What I would like to share with you the next 17 sessions over 15 days is well-researched information, facts, ideas, reasons, and explanations to help build a sturdy foundation for yourself. This seminar will provide many strong blocks of material, and you must choose from them and patiently lay them down one by one to form your own base. It will be much easier to handle tough questions in life once you have a strong base. So we enter into the first session as an introduction. We will do two things. We will talk about the premises and the big question of whether God exists using the PAN process, and we'll describe what these mean. So the seminar is God for real. Let's reason it out. This is not just a lecture series, not just a presentation of facts and arguments. It is primarily a description of a method of inquiry. How do we approach these big questions, especially when they're controversial? And so this series, the whole series, will form some response to that question. And the reasoning and the attempt to arrive at a satisfying explanation will be presented so that you also may embark on a similar endeavor for yourself. So if you enjoy wholesome, friendly, and spirited intellectual tussles, well, you're in the right place. We are not afraid to ask hard questions, even if they are controversial, because most of the questions are controversial. We will face them squarely and fairly. Many of you have already asked a whole lot of questions. I've read through all of them, interesting ones. We will address every single one of them at some point during these 15 days. So the overall plan of the seminar, so what we'll do first, we'll lay down the premises, the principles that will guide us, and then we'll ask whether or not God exists. And then we'll test the theory of evolution, examine relativism and pluralism. I will describe the words and give their meanings later. And then we will compare the 5 great world religions: Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, and Christianity. Now, one of you asked in your questions, why believe in a God you cannot see? And also, what makes us know that Christianity is the right one to follow? Well, this is the seminar meant to answer just that question. So if you're the one who questioned, and if you have this question anyway, please follow me carefully through the whole time, and I believe you'll be able to see. Is God for real? That's the question. What a topic. Controversial, with many secondary questions attached to it. We will face them all. My main aim is to make you think for yourself. So no matter what I tell you now, you can hear, but don't swallow it. Take it, grapple with it, wrestle with it, and then make an argument and a base for yourself. So whatever your present ideas, put on your thinking caps and let's reason it out together. Well, a word of caution, naturally, because we are dealing with intellectual things which go back and forth. Some of them will become complex and philosophical. Well, when it becomes that, don't worry. Just put it aside for the moment. Don't worry. There'll be a lot of other things that are clear enough that you can really wrestle with. And furthermore, we will have question and answers during every session, every time. So you can always ask for clarification during the Q&A period. Now, this question of God's existence, most debates and discussions on such topics end in a stalemate without a reasonable, satisfying conclusion. Why? One reason is the failure to set the principles that will guide us before the discussion. If you don't do that, the words proceed on different wavelengths and go past one another. No one wins, and yet both will claim victory, and actually both are confused. So our first job is to set the premises for our discussion. So here are some of the premises that we're going to use during our discussion. By the way, I have not gotten straight into the topic. I need these principles to be laid out, so bear with me. It'll take a little while. Don't get bored. Set the premises for the whole seminar of 15 days. So we'll take a little time in setting the premises. We start, and when we start, anyone who starts has three possible starting positions or attitudes. Number one, the attitude of a disbelieving inquirer. Number two, the attitude of a believing inquirer. Number three, the attitude of a neutral inquirer. Note that they're all inquirers. The fact is we have all three inquirers in us, each of us. And because they're all inquiring attitudes, we can flip from one to the other very smoothly. There's no barrier between them. And so we really don't know which attitude we have brought at which point to the table and to the issue at hand. So what do we mean by these words? The disbelieving attitude is by a person who dismisses the report he hears even before he makes any investigation. He doesn't like it, so throw it off. The believing attitude will swallow. He doesn't care to figure out whether it's true or false. He likes it, and so he takes it. That's the believing attitude. Whereas the inquiring attitude does not initially accept or dismiss, but will hold the verdict carefully, watch for investigation, and then he makes his decision. Here's another way of looking at it. The disbelieving attitude will focus only on the questions, and if there's evidence, he doesn't want to look there. The believing attitude will focus on the evidence, and when there are big questions, he doesn't want to look there because he wants to believe. The inquiring attitude, rather, focuses on the weight of evidence. You and I are just humans. Our brain cells, the number is limited. We cannot put everything together. And so we will never have absolute proof. I know some believers, they like to say, I know this is the truth. Friend, we will never have proof. What we can have, however, by which we can make a reasonable decision one way or the other, is called the weight of evidence. The moment you use those words, we should understand one or two things. When you say weight of evidence, it means there is weight on both sides. Both sides have some evidence. Both sides may have impressive arguments. Also, both sides will have gaps. Both sides will have discrepancies and even contradictions. I have not seen one belief system on earth that does not have gaps and discrepancies and contradictions. All of them have. The question is, which one has more or less? So just finding evidence or discovering gaps doesn't settle the question. You have to look at both, all, and then decide which is heavier, which one has better evidence and fewer gaps. That side wins. So that's what we're going to do. We may inquire, like we said, with a believing or a disbelieving attitude and think we are very fair and balanced, but that is not true inquiry. Why? Because all of us, we are not looking to know the truth. We love our opinions. So we want to find support to some evidence to support our own stand. It's called confirmation bias or just simply bias. So what is that? It's the tendency to recall, select, or interpret evidence in a way that supports one's pre-existing beliefs. How many of us have this bias? Every one of us, you, me, everyone on earth, 100% on planet Earth have confirmation bias. So don't call anybody biased and don't be called biased by anyone. So what shall we do about this? Because we want to become neutral inquirers. How do we move away from biases to become neutral? First, we address the bias itself. Number one, don't pretend that you are balanced and fair. You and I are not. We are biased. Let's acknowledge it. Once we acknowledge it, we tell ourselves that that bias will not help us do a good inquiry and search. So we want to set it aside. So we decide to set it aside. How do we set it aside? We drop our beliefs. But you can't drop your beliefs. That's not possible. So we do number 4 and 5. During this session and this series, we will not defend our own beliefs. Also, number 5, we will not attack the opposing side. If we do these two things, then we will avoid blindly believing on one side and also blindly dismissing. Both are not good. And we will then, if we have avoided these two things, engage in what is called neutral inquiry. So what is the meaning of neutral inquiry? A neutral inquirer always makes two competing theories. Well, for today, we don't have to make two, but there are already two. God exists and God does not exist. There are two already. The fact now then is, number two, we should examine and evaluate both. Yes. How do we do? Number three, we treat both on an equal footing. To start off with, we are neutral. And we give both the same chance to win. You know, 1 and 2 will avoid default conclusions. What's a default conclusion? Let me give you an example. Let me ask you a question. See if you can answer this. When is a good decision a bad decision? And when is a bad decision a good decision? Well, if that's contradictory, it is in a sense, but in a sense it also can be enlightening. Here's how we can look at it. If you are faced with 3 options, good, better, and best, and you chose just the good, then that's a bad decision because you could have gone for the best. On the other hand, if you are faced with bad, worse, and worst options, then in that setting, choosing the bad is good. In fact, it is the best. Why have we said this? Because when we deal with this big controversial question, you cannot make a good decision. You can only make a bad decision, meaning there will always be gaps and discrepancies, no matter which belief system you choose. So we can only make a bad or worse or worst. So choosing the bad at that point is the best. So don't worry about really getting everything in line. Just look at the weight of evidence. The point really is that if you choose the bad, in this setting, we will choose the best. In other words, when you look at something, don't look at only one. Don't look at just the good points and grab it, because the other option might be better. You should go to that one then. Or you look at something that is not very good over here, so throw it off. No, don't throw it off, because the other one is worse. Stay with your bad one, because your bad is the best. I hope I've painted a picture in which we as humans, with our limitations, are trying our best. That's all we can do. So number 5, once you settle this, you must set the criteria for the evaluation that you're going to do before you start. And we're going to do it right now. Here are the 3 points. We will lean on evidence. And number 2, common sense and logic. And number 3, explanation and reason. We will not go for mere opinion and illogic and absurd claims. Socrates, a great thinker, quoted Plato and said, "Go where the argument leads. Don't pull it where you want it to go. Go where the evidence pulls you." That's what we're going to see. Facing big questions requires real courage. Some people think, okay, I'll be a neutral inquirer. Friends, it's not easy to be a neutral inquirer. Trust me. Because it indicates a willingness to change previous ideas. And if needed, even change multiple aspects of our lives. Hence, even after deciding to inquire in an honest and neutral manner, we will find our bias is too strong. So what do we need? We need help to create an atmosphere that will keep us in the neutral inquiring mode. Got that? We have to get that atmosphere. We're going to do it right now. But before that, let's take a short break. Now, we will do this quite often because there are many things that I will say that are not familiar and that are not the usual things that people talk about. So it takes a little time to think. So we'll take a break now for just a few seconds. Think about what I have said. If you have something that is not very clear, jot it down, and at the Q&A time, we'll discuss it. Otherwise, just think about what I have said and how we are trying our best to come to the best possible position so that our base and foundation is strong. That's what we've done so far. But we want to make the atmosphere now. So take just a few seconds. let's carry on. So here's the atmosphere we need to create. We need 4 things. Number 1, humility, honesty, calmness, and respect. What do you mean by these words? Humility. This is the cardinal, the absolute prime and most essential factor of all. Never should a person puff up his chest and say, I know. When you are doing a search, the moment you say, I know, you have blocked yourself. Humility is a teachable spirit, learning attitude all the time, not saying, I know, but please tell me. You stand small because the amount of information, the entire universe is so big that your bitty little amount is really, really very small. You can't puff up your chest and take pride in that. So it's too great and grand out there. What you know is little, be humble. Number 2, honest. The willingness to give credit to a point or an argument, no matter who brings it to the table, and even if that credit has the possibility of destroying my own previous stand or position. Do you see my name there? That's because that is my definition of honesty. You should be able to give credit where it is due. Don't say, if I give credit, then he'll win the argument. That's beside the point. When the point is made and it is good, the argument is impressive, then we should say yes. In other words, I call it the wow factor. If a piece of information is really impressive, you should be able to say wow. Here's my question to you. Are you willing to say wow when the thing is really impressive? Let's test it out. I'm going to tell you something. Are you ready to say wow? I'm going to tell you something. Let's see if you say wow. 22/7 pi is an improper fraction. You can't really divide it exactly. 21/7, yes, you can divide because it comes to 3. But 22/7, you can't do it correctly. In other words, not correctly, you can't do it completely. You'll come to 3.142 and then it carries on and on in a kind of haphazard manner. There's no real pattern that goes right through. So what psychologists have done, they have used this as a test for memory. How many digits can you remember after that 142? 3.142 and carry on. How many can you remember? You know what the world record is? Take a guess. Take a guess. Oh, by the way, I hope you have a slip of paper or a sheet of paper which you can write down something, because we're going to do some writing down, not plenty words, but some numbers and give points to certain arguments. So on that sheet that you have now, or get one right now, what do you think is the world record? How many digits do you think the world record holder can recite without looking again at that list? You don't know right now, most likely, because you may not have read it. I read it because I had to, give this seminar, so I read it up. Do you know what the world record is today? The world record was held by an Indian and then went to the Japanese and then went back to an Indian. That's the last I know. He recited pi to the 70,000th digit before making the first mistake. Did you say wow? If you did, then you are willing to say wow. So when the point is impressive, you will say wow. How about calmness? When it comes to religion, it is very precious to an individual, the beliefs. When you attack them, they attack back. So there's always a tendency to fight. But remember, anger will fight your own clear thinking and sharp judgment. It doesn't knock the other person off. Anger, no. The most effective weapon to defeat the opposing view is a strong argument, not anger and rage. So calmness, which is the natural outcome of being humble and honest, will give you the best chance. Remain calm. Respect, it is not agreement, it's not admiration. It is the right we give others to make their own choices without looking down our noses at them and calling them names and try to dismiss them. No, we maintain their dignity at all times. Then we can expect them also to respect us, and then we will have mutual respect. That's the way we will do this whole seminar. So what are the 4 things? Humility, honesty, calmness, and respect. By the way, this is not just for this seminar. These four can apply to anything you do in life. Just follow these four and see what happens. It's not easy because we are not naturally inclined to do these four. But if you do this, I will tell you, I've seen it. If you do this, no matter how hard the argument is, no matter how contentious is the argument, you will come out as friends in the end. Follow these four. And it will also give both of you the best chance to come to a reasonable and reasonably correct conclusion. So all four: humility, honesty, calmness, and respect. With that, we come to this question. I call it the great divide. Atheism says God is non-existent and fictitious. And on the other side, B, the believing side, God is in existence and is factual. Now, there's a basic question some people ask. Do we need to think about God and talk about God at all? Why not leave the question just out completely? Just leave it out. What difference will it make? Now, to that question, what difference? There are two responses. And I'm submitting it to you, two responses. Number one, it makes no difference at all. And number two, it makes a huge difference to the same question, yes. So it depends then on a big if. If something, then there's no difference at all. If something else, then it makes a huge difference. What is that if? If, number one, if our human lives, say 60, 80, 100 years, is the sum total of our existence, nothing beyond, that's all we have, then nobody needs God. Did you know that? Do you know both the sides agree? It's not surprising because it's actually simple observation, common sense. Here are two statements from the two sides, one from an atheist and one from a respected believer. Number one, the atheist, Quentin Smith. He wrote a book. He actually co-authored that book, Theism, Atheism, and the Big Bang Cosmology. And in that he says, the only reasonable belief is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. So there's nothing beyond life. How about the believing side? King Solomon, believer. Here's what he says. What happened to the fool will happen to me also. The fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Look, nobody needs God to live and die like a king or like a fool. Nobody needs God to live and die like an animal or like a human. Second, if the supernatural realm is real and God does exist, then a utopia, heaven, paradise, nirvana, something, it's a reasonable theory then. And if that is the actual goal of our lives, contrary to Quentin Smith, who said there's nothing at all, then we will have to confess at least two things. Number one, humans are inherently incapable of getting there. Whatever that utopia, heaven, paradise, nirvana. You and I can't get there on our own. We have no way of getting there. Number two, when we do get there, we need God to, or before getting there, we need God here to instruct us how to get there. And once we get there, somebody has to tell us how to live, how to do things, and what to have. None of these things we can do on our own. So, do we need God? No. If the supernatural realm is fictitious, meaning if there's no God, no heaven, nothing. But yes, and absolutely yes, if there is something known as heaven and paradise, nirvana, and reaching there is our true goal. So the pertinent question right now, and it becomes a pertinent question, is the supernatural realm factual? Does God truly exist? Because if he does not, then this is all we have on this earth, and that's it. But if he does, there's something much more beyond. So when we have this question, we should not only be fair in trying to assess it, but we should also show that we are being fair. We should give both sides, like I said, the same chance to win. Only then we can be sure, satisfied that the real winner, the winning side has actually won. And then we can provide our evidence confidently. One way is to implement the PAN process. So what is the PAN process? It's a method of inquiry that examines both options equally. I formulated this and used it in my search. So what's the meaning of pan? Pan means you don't stay on one side, you go across. Pan American Airlines flies across the United States. Pan African Games, you have the athletes from across Africa coming together. It also means, denotes a process of actually sifting, panning for gold. Way back in the gold rush, they panned for gold. They put a pan into the stream and gather up rocks and nuggets, but they don't know which one is which. So they will just shake it in the water, and the stream's force will push away the lighter stuff, which is just ordinary rock, and keep the heavier nuggets of gold. And so the process of panning is the process of sifting that which is valuable from that which is ordinary and mundane. And number 3, it's also the first 3 letters of my family name, Pandit. So it's my process that I formed, that I used in my inquiry. What does it look like? It has 4 columns of arguments, because we have 2 sides. Atheism and theism. God exists, God does not exist. So we have 4 columns, a pro and a con. In other words, you look at one side, God exists. What are the arguments for it? What are the arguments against it? 2 columns. And then we look at the other side, God does not exist. What are the arguments for it, and what are the arguments against it? Another 2 columns, you need 4. So here's what it looks like. Column 1, arguments for A, atheism. Column 2, arguments against B, the believing side. Column 3, arguments for B, the believing side. And column number 4, arguments for against A, the atheistic side. Now, you don't have to follow it in any particular order. You can do any of the columns first or last. It doesn't matter, because each of the columns actually stands by itself. But we are going to put them together, because what we are trying to show is that we are going to be fair. Look at both the sides. So that's what we're going to do. So here are the premises we've taken so long to settle. Number 1, assess your present attitude. What kind of an inquirer are you? Disbelieving or believing inquirer? Then you confess and avoid your bias. You do have it. Let's put it aside, and we choose to remain a neutral inquirer. So what's a neutral inquirer? They always make 2 propositions and look at both equally. And we established the criteria for the inquiry, and we established it: evidence, reason, and logic, nothing else, not opinion and not absurd claims. And then we create an atmosphere for maintaining that neutral inquiry: humility, honesty, calmness, and respect. And then we demonstrate that we really want to do neutral inquiry by using the PAN process. So that's what we're going to do right now. So let's take a break. Think about what I've said. Any questions? Write them down. We'll take a little break right now. Go through the points and see which one maybe was a bit hazy. Note it down and we'll discuss it. This part has been actually very important. If you know how to get into the mode of inquiry, you can address any question under the sun, and most likely you will come out with a reasonable conclusion. So follow these premises later on as well. Let's carry on. I call it the Great Divide. A, atheism. God, non-existent, fictitious. B, believing side. God is in existence and factual. We said earlier that we should show that we are being fair. And one of the ways is to implement the PAN process. Now what we're going to do, like I said, have a sheet of paper. And we're going to grade the arguments in each column. There are many arguments, but I will choose only one just for the sake of time. And once we have finished the argument, you must grade the argument in that column. So if the argument is really good, well, you give more than 6 or 7. And if the argument is very poor, then you give less than 4. If it is neither this side nor that side, then you can give 5 or 6. But it's subjective. You make your own assessment. No matter who is with you, make it yourself. I will tell you what grade I gave, but don't follow what I do. Give it yourself. Each column, grade the arguments in that column out of a possible 10. In other words, if the argument is so great that there's no question, then you give it a 10. So we're going to do all 4. We'll start with column 1, arguments for atheism. There is none. And when I say this, people are quite stunned. But that's true. Why? Because the only proof of atheism is disproof of God's existence, and that is column 2. Can you see that? It's column 2, arguments against belief. So the only proof of atheism is argument there, and that is column 2, not column 1. So in column 1, there's nothing. The other reason why there is nothing here is because atheism is a negative statement. There is no God. God is non-existent. It's a negative statement. And a negative statement is valid only when every possibility has been exhausted. For example, if I claim that my dad was not at home and our house had 20 rooms, how many rooms should I have inspected before making a legitimate claim that he is not at home? All 20. The claim would not be credible if I had left even one room out. In other words, the claim of his absence is true only when all the possibilities have been examined and set aside. Is he in room 1 or 2 or 5 or 15? Every possibility must be exhausted. Then you can say he's not at home at all. Because if he's in room 17 and you looked at all the others, you still can't say he is not there because he is in that room. So now applying it, if God is in existence, he should be somewhere. Have you looked at every corner of your town? No. How about the state, country, continent, world? Have you been to the moon? You know, there's one side of the moon that's always the other side to us. That's why when you see the landscape on the moon, it's always the same. It's not that the landscape is the same all around. No, the other side can't be seen at all times. It's the other side. What if God sat on the other side? Then how about going to the sun? We have not gone anywhere near the sun. We don't know what the sun is like in terms of real getting there, nor even the distance from here to the sun, 93 million miles away. How many suns are there in our Milky Way galaxy? 200 billion. And how many galaxies in the known universe? 600 billion with a B. Have you been anywhere there? So how can we say, I've checked it all out. He's not anywhere. No, we can't. Not only have you not checked all, you haven't even started checking. You haven't looked at one star and the space in between. So how can we say that? Furthermore, God can possibly move about. You go looking for him in India, he could have gone to Canada. Yes. Thus, to claim his total absence, one would have to know every point in the universe at the same time. Then we can say he's not anywhere. This would require omniscience and omnipresence, the attributes of God. Thus, there are no arguments in column 1. In other words, to say that there is no God, you will have to have the attributes of God or become a God yourself. And to have the attributes of God or to become a God yourself, once you become a God yourself, you cannot say that there is no God. Correct? What grade would you give this column? I gave it 1 out of 10 because there's no argument. There's some people who say 0. You give whatever grade you want. Before we go on to the next one, which is column 2. Arguments against the claim that there is a God. Now there are 6 over there. We're going to look only 1. By the way, this number 1, evil, pain, and suffering, is the most common question that you all have asked in your questions. That's the biggest question. We're going to answer the question in one sense now, but not the full question. Here we're going to ask, is this pain and suffering and evil an argument against the existence of God? The other question that is related to this is, how can we reconcile a loving God to a God who is almighty and at the same time showing so much pain and suffering on earth? That question we're not going to do right now, but it is a first part that we're going to start off with. Can this argument be used as an argument against the existence of God? First of all, what is the argument? Here it is. Epicurus is a Greek philosopher, 300 BC. This is what he said. Either he is not good or else he is not almighty. He can't be both. And then David Hume, an excellent philosopher a few hundred years ago. In fact, if you study philosophy, you can't escape David Hume or Immanuel Kant. These two are big figures. And this is what he said. Is he, God, willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent, he is weak, he is not almighty. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent, he has a bad heart, he is not loving. Is he both able and willing? Then whence is this evil? And Stendhal, well, what's the problem here? The problem is this. If you claim that God is really almighty, he can do everything, and also he's really loving, then how can you reconcile that with so much of pain and evil and suffering? In fact, they are not in harmony. They are such a contradiction. It's the contradiction. It's not just the fact of the contradiction, but the contradiction that is so horrible and so vexing and so aggravating that Stendhal said God's only excuse is that he does not exist. So better not say he exists instead of trying to put these two together. So that is the argument. Others have looked at it, and here's what they've said. Evil constitutes the biggest single argument, the biggest single stumbling block, said Ed Miller. And James Orr says one of the most crucial protests raised by unbelievers against the fact of God. So did you get that picture? That's the argument. What grade would you give it? I gave it 7 out of 10. To me, it was impressive. Quite an impressive argument. Yes. It's a tough one. It kind of hits at your heart. So, having given that, I looked at it a little closer and asked whether the question actually forms a reasonable argument against the existence of God. Or is it about what kind of God rather than the existence of God? So it required a little more looking into it, and I looked at it in 5 different ways, and let's look at them right now. Number 1, both the sides, the believing side and the disbelieving side, atheists and theists, have this as a big question. Even believers acknowledge the presence of severe pain and suffering, and they feel it. Yet they believe in God's existence. Therefore, if both the sides are looking at the same thing and making different conclusions, then whatever they're looking at is not the deciding factor. So evil and suffering is not the deciding factor. It's something else, but not this. Number 2, a contradiction in features is not proof of non-existence. Many entities and even individuals have contradicting features. You can see a guy very nice in the morning and very nasty in the evening. He's not non-existent, he just has contradicting features. In other words, a contradiction requires an explanation. Why is he so nice in the morning? Maybe he had a nice sleep and a good breakfast. Then why is he so nasty in the evening? Maybe he had a nice big swig of drink, alcoholic, and then he became nasty. So we are giving an explanation to the contradiction. So a contradiction doesn't allow you to throw everything out. It just requires an explanation. Number 3, this contradiction is caused by supernatural qualities. Because we say God is almighty. Now, which human is almighty? No human is ever almighty. And no human is ever all-loving. So because we have used supernatural qualities, that is what causes the contradiction. So it is the existence of God that causes the contradiction. Therefore, if a contradiction exists, then God, who caused the contradiction by his features, also exists. You cannot use the description of the qualities of God to prove the non-existence of God. You can dispute the qualities, but not the existence itself. So here's the choice. You either keep the contradiction and keep the existence of God, or you drop the contradiction and your big argument vanishes. Number 4, do we suffer 24/7? No, everyone doesn't suffer 24/7. We also have pleasures and joys. So like we said, pan goes right across. Don't stay at one point. Yes, there's evil and suffering and a lot of it, but there's also joys and pleasures. So if we say evil and suffering denote the absence of God because of the contradiction between his love and might on one hand and the presence of evil on the other hand, then joys and pleasures, how are we going to explain those? We should say that that's because of the presence of God, because there is harmony now between his might and his all-loving nature and the fact that he's giving us joys and pleasures. So at best, they equal each other out, knock each other out. That's the best part of that argument. In other words, that's the best we can reach. However, there's something else. Number 5. If the evidence for the absence of an entity, along with evidence for the presence of that entity, is found in the same location, then that entity is present in that location. So if there is evidence of absence as well as evidence of presence, the evidence of presence wins. I'll give you an example. Let's say we are out at sea and we want to look for land. We climb to the top mast of the ship looking for land. We can't see land, all we see is water, but we know that there could be evidence of land if we see a puff of smoke. So on the horizon, puff of smoke means land. Now we have a 360-degree view, so we're looking all around for land. 359 degrees, we don't see anything, just water. But 360th degree, we see a puff of smoke. Is there land? Yes, there is. What happened to the 359 degrees where there's evidence that there is no land? Here's the dictum, my friends. One bit of evidence for the presence will outweigh all the evidence for the absence. So, applying it now, if evil and suffering, which shows absence of God, as well as joys and pleasures, which show the presence of God, are both present in our lives and they are present on earth, then God is present. Simple, and it makes good sense. So the question of evil, pain, and suffering, if you draw it to its logical conclusion, does not support the atheistic side, but places the argument on the side of theism. One of the strongest arguments against the existence of God actually points to the existence of God. Mind you, we have not answered the question of why a loving God has given us pain and suffering. That we will do at the Q&A time. Now we are saying you cannot use this argument to say there is no God. That's the main point. And so the marks given at the start, I gave 7, must now be removed and be shifted from this column to the next column for the existence of God. So when you take it out, what is left? 0. So this column number 2 has 0. Column number 3, arguments for the existence of God. Arguments for theism. You see 4 on the screen there. We're going to look at only 1, logical analysis. Logic, the type of logic we are going to use, requires 2 steps. Number 1, it must have a base statement that is above question, meaning both sides agree that that statement is true. You can't start logic with a statement that itself is controversial. That is not logical. So you start logic by making a base statement that both sides agree, and on that base statement, then you have your steps of reasoning. So we're going to do some logical analysis right now, 4 of them. Number 1, it's called the Kalam cosmological argument, and here's the base statement. All changes have causes. The clearest changes are starting and stopping. So whatever begins or starts has to have a cause. That's the base statement. Added to that is the base statement which scientists have told us now, that the universe had a start. It's called the Big Bang. Start. So if the universe had a start, it must have a cause. It didn't happen by itself. Nothing, no change happens by itself. Starting does not happen by itself. It has to have a cause. Logical analysis number 2, called the pan-cosmological argument. It says that no effect causes itself, and the cause is always distinct from its effect or product. For example, this is a mouse. We never say that the mouse caused itself. The mouse is not the cause of the mouse. It is the producer, the manufacturer, who is the cause of the mouse. And when you look at that, you realize that what it looks like and what's made up of is very different from the cause. The producer is very different from the mouse, and he is distinct also from the mouse, and therefore the cause is always distinct from its product. When you apply that now, if the universe is the product, first of all, it could not have caused itself. And the cause, and there we saw that it has a cause, it has to be separate, distinct from the universe. Logical analysis number 3, it's called the order principle of signs. In chronology, meaning in time, which is first and second, here's the base statement: all causes produce effects, and all effects have a cause. And the cause always precedes the effect. You can't have it the other way around. It's the cause that produces the effect. Therefore, if the effect is the universe, then the cause preceded the universe. Logical analysis number 4. Again, the order principle of science, and this time it is which is bigger and smaller. A specific corollary of the order principle is the law that no effect can be quantitatively greater or qualitatively superior to its cause. In other words, the cause is greater than its effect, always. We can look at it another way and use the word source. The source of a product always has more than the product. I'll give you an example. Suppose you have 100 pounds in your pocket, in your purse or in your wallet, and you got the 100 pounds from the bank, then I think anyone can make a reasonable deduction that the bank has more than 100 pounds in its coffers. Similarly, if you brought home a bag of groceries from the grocery shop, then I think we all can make the deduction that the source of your bag of groceries has more than one bag of groceries. It's always more, and that's why it's called the source. So the cause is always greater than the effect. The source is always greater than the amount you have in your hands. Now, this analysis we will apply right now, because the world has at least these: life, thinking, matter and energy, time and space, and the laws of nature. So, if the world has this and there's a cause that gave us this, then the cause possesses an abundance of life because he gave yours and mine and everybody else. All the animals, all the trees and plants, all the insects also, he gave a lot of life. He has a big reservoir of life. Number 2, his thinking must be big because he gave your intellect and mine and everybody else. Billions of us have intellects. So where did we get ours from? The cause must be having a huge intellect to give us a little bit each. Matter and energy, he must be having a massive power. We'll look at that in a moment. And as far as time and space, he has to have full control because everything is moving according to laws, whether here or on the moon or in this galaxy or in the next galaxy, same. So he must have full control. And the laws of nature, he must harmonize all laws, because if he does not, then there'll be disharmony and there'll be catastrophes. Here's what Albert Einstein said about his intellectual power. He says his feelings take the form of rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. In another place, he mentions that he senses an infinitely superior spirit or mind. So could Albert Einstein's description be a description of actually omniscience? How about power? You know, the theory of special relativity, E is equal to mc squared, says the energy and mass are interchangeable according to a set equation. In other words, it requires a lot of energy just to make a small amount of mass. Let me give you an example. Here's a penny. This is a US penny. This is about 2 to 2.5 grams in weight. So here's the statement on the screen. If 1 gram of mass is completely converted into energy, it would provide the power in the atomic bomb that was detonated over Hiroshima. So you need at least 2 Hiroshima bombs power to create just this. So how much power do you think would be required to create the whole building? How about the whole world? How about the whole solar system and one sun? We have 2 billion suns in our Milky Way galaxy alone, and 600 billion galaxies in the known universe. And this visible mass is only 10% of the total mass. The rest is all dark matter and dark energy. Can you think of how much power, energy must be brought so that we can create this much of stuff? Mind-bending, and would easily go beyond all human computation. The clear logical conclusion would be to acknowledge that the source or cause may reasonably be described as infinite or omnipotent. In fact, Aristotle also looked at something like this. And in his logic, he came to the idea that if there is something that caused this world, it would have to be omnipotent and omniscient. Can you see those words underlined? Yes, that's Aristotle on plain logic. So, logical analysis, the 4 that we looked at, the universe has a cause. The cause is separate from the universe. The cause preceded the universe, and the cause is possibly omnipotent and omniscient. So this cause may reasonably be called God. And this conclusion was reached by evidence, logic alone, without a single reference to any religious founder or religious writing at all. Go where the argument leads. Remember that statement from Socrates? If you see an argument, you go with it. Don't go against it. What grade would you give it? This column, I gave it 8 out of 10. It's impressive. So you give whatever you want. Some have given more than 8 when I have done it in other places. You write it down because we're going to tally our numbers at the end. So let's take a break now before we go to number 4. This time we'll take a 2-minute break so that we can, go out and maybe relieve ourselves and have a drink of water or whatever. Let's take a 2 to 3 minute break.
Whilst we are waiting to resume, we are all please reminded that you can ask questions, and to ask your questions, there is a link that is constantly being put in the chat, and it reads, "Hi, the question link for participants." And so you can click on that link, and then you can type in your question and send it over to us so that we can see any question that you have for it to be answered. Thank you.
All right, let's get to column 4. I hope you have graded all the columns. Like I said, we're going to tally these at the end and see what it looks like. Here are the arguments against the claim that there is no God, against atheism. We're going to look at 2. In each one, we looked at 1, but I think this one we'll look at 2. You see, let's go back to this. Number 3 is from nothing. You see, if God did not create the universe, or if there's no agent, then it came from absolutely nothing. There is no other option. Either an agent created it, or it came by itself from absolutely nothing. So we are not saying it. They themselves will say it. Here it is. So from nothing, our universe begins. Bill Bryson wrote that in a book called The Short History of Nearly Everything. Victor Stenger says, so where did the laws of nature come from? They came from nothing, the void out of which the universe arose. That's the book, God, the Failed Hypothesis. And then Quinton Smith, we already had quoted him before. The only reasonable belief is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. Look at the word nothing. All of them say the same thing. So it is true that that's the claim. It came from nothing. So that is what we're going to look at. Actually, it doesn't seem reasonable, right? How can everything come from nothing? But like I said, we're not going to just dismiss it. Look at it. So we're going to look at it in 3 ways. Number 1, physically. Let's build the Great Wall of China, and I'm asking you to build it. But I will give you no material, no mason. Somebody's... Okay. I thought somebody was also speaking. I will give you no material, no builder, no time, no space, not even you. And if you are going to complain to me, hey, even I am non-existent. So how did we build it? In other words, you start from absolute nothingness. It is physically impossible to do anything. It's physically, totally impractical. How about philosophically? Do you know absolute nothingness cannot be imagined at all? Why? Because to imagine, you have to have a brain and mind. Without a brain and mind, you cannot imagine. So how can you imagine the non-existence of your own brain and mind, which you are using? Only then can you imagine absolute nothingness. You must knock off your brain. That's impossible. So that which is cannot be even imagined. You can't propose it as a scientific theory. Even fantasy fiction must first be imagined before it is written down. So philosophically, absolute nothingness as an origin is an impossibility. How about mathematically? Science may be represented as common sense wrapped in mathematics. That's especially true of physics. See, in physics, when you make a statement of physics science, you can't call it physics until it has a mathematical equation attached to it. For example, you just can't say you can't just say gravity. You must describe gravity in terms of numbers. And gravity is that force that is related to the masses of the two bodies and inversely related to the square of the distance. Can you see that? It's a mathematical equation that locks in your concept of physics. So in physics science, you have to have a statement, and the statement must have a mathematical base. So let's try that out with this. So first make the statements. The atheistic statement is nothing did nothing with nothing and produced everything. Theistic proposal, someone did something with that nothing and produced the universe. So when you put that into a mathematical equation, this is what it looks like. At the top, atheism 0 plus 0 plus 0 is equal to 100. And theism says x plus y, these are numbers, will be equal to 0. Which of these two has a chance to be really correct? Think about it. We're looking at zeros, right? This number and this number has the same digits. 6 zeros and a 1, 6 zeros and a 1. But this is only 1, whereas this is a million. How come this is only 1 when it has the same number of digits and the same digits? Because the zeros are the starting point, and the starting point as 0 mean nothing. Because if they're only zeros, it'll still be 0. You have to have a number put there. Only after a number is a starting point, and the rest makes meaning. If you start with 0, it will make meaning only if you put a 1 there. If you leave it at 0, which is what they are saying, look out here, 0 plus 0 plus 0. If you leave zeros, you'll end up with only 0. So 0 as a starting point is valueless. Can you see that? 0 as starting point, valueless. 0 is an absolute block to spontaneous change. This is the absolute block. There's nothing that you can get if you have only zeros. Only a number added from outside the series of zeros will give value or substance. So absolute nothingness, 0 without any real numbers as a mathematical starting point is worse than absurdity. Therefore, physically, it is totally impractical, philosophically impossible, and mathematically it's worse than absurdity. The Latin aphorism says, ex nihilo nihil fit, translated, out of nothing, nothing comes. So the origin of our universe was not absolute nothingness. What grade would you give it? I gave it 9 out of 10. I said we will do one more on this, and it's the statistical analysis. Chance. Statistics. Chance is a subjective, and we use it every day. Actually, we use it all the time. What are the chances this will happen and that will happen? But chance is also a mathematical concept called probability. It's a very specific formula. You throw the numbers in there and get the chance or the probability out. And it is usually 2 numbers. It says 1 is to 5 or 10, or 10 is to 1. There are 2 numbers. So we'll look at that right now. In scientific evaluation, when you want to do something with certain stuff, then you must test it mathematically to at least 10 to the power of 15, especially if what you're doing has to do with life or loss of limb or body or danger. Then the stuff that you are going to use and the way you're going to make it, that must be tested mathematically to 10 to the power of 15, especially things like, roller coasters, suspension bridges, or the aerodynamics on a plane. Those things have to be tested to 10 to the power of 15. In other words, 10 to the power of 15. What's the meaning of that? 1 followed by 15 zeros. That many times it will stay, and only one time it will fail. That's called a fact. Whereas on the other hand, if it will happen only once and not happen 10 to the power of 15 times, then scientifically we say it's not possible. When you want to state a scientific law, the number shifts up to 10 to the power of 50. Here's the concept. If something is going to happen 10 to the power of 50 times in your calculation, and it will not happen once, then you just drop that one and say it will always happen. It becomes a scientific law. Similarly, if it will happen only once and will not happen 10 to the power of 50 times in those circumstances, then you drop the one and say it will never happen. So 10 to the power of 50 seems to be the cutting off point when you want to establish a law. Either a law that it will happen or it will never happen. Utterly impossible. So how big is 10 to the power of 50? Do you know how many seconds there are? Since the time that they say the universe began 15 billion years ago, it's only 10 to the power of 18 seconds that we have from then till today. If you want to go to 10 to the power of 20 seconds, you have to go on for 1.5 trillion years. In other words, 10 to the power of 50 is a huge, huge number. Do you know if 10 billion of us, the whole Earth's population, did an experiment every second, 1, 2, all 10 billion. From the time the Big Bang occurred till today, we would have reached only 10 to the power of 28 times altogether. So 10 to the power of 50 is a huge number. So one chance in 10 to the power of 50, you just drop the one and say it will never happen. Whereas if it is 10 to the power of 50 times it will happen, then you don't worry about the other one, say it'll always happen, it's a law. So 1 is to 10 to the power of 50 impossible. So Michael Denton calculated what chances are there that 100 functional proteins could come together to form just one cell. That's the minimum amount of proteins that a simple cell requires. You know how many proteins we have in each of our cells? About 10 billion with a B, 10 billion proteins in each cell. That's how it functions and works. So this is the absolute simplest cell. What are the chances? And his calculation shows here 1 chance in 10 to the power of 2,000. That is the chance of bringing just 100 functional proteins together. So, is it possible or impossible? Here's another calculation. Look, proteins are made up of amino acids. They are little blocks. Amino acids are right-handed and left-handed. And when we make amino acids in the laboratory, they always come out equal. Equal left-handed to right-handed. We don't know how to make it more like right-handed or left-handed. And we need 10,000 of those to make up those 100 proteins. The DNA chain also is made up of little blocks. They're called nucleotides. And there we need about 100,000 of these. And they are also right-handed and left-handed. But when you look at the cell, we find that all 10,000 amino acids have to be only left-handed. All nucleotides have to be only right-handed. What are the chances? Ralph Muncaster in his book calculated the chances, and it came to 1 chance in 10 to the power of 33,113. I wonder if you have said wow to any of these numbers. Here's one more. If you didn't say wow, how about another try? Harold Borowitz calculate the odds of a cell, the whole cell, not the cell, not just the proteins and the amino acids, the whole cell, assembling, just coming together under the most ideal conditions to be 1 chance in 10 to the power of 100 billion. Look, if 1 is to 10 to the power of 50 is equal to impossibility, then this number would require 10 to the power of 99 billion impossible events, not 99 billion, 10 to the power of 99 billion impossible events or miracles, so that only 1 cell could be formed. So let's put some logic into this. If only 2 possibilities exist, in other words, it could have come together by itself, or somebody put it together. So there are only 2 possibilities. Of these, if there's one of them that is correct, and there has to be only one correct, then here are the 3 possibilities. If A is possible, then B is also possible as a possibility. If A becomes improbable, then B becomes probable. And if A is impossible, then B becomes fact. If there are only 2 possibilities and one of them is correct, this is the reasoning that follows out. Let's check it out. Let's do this little math problem that I'll give you right now. And it is on the screen. What is 9 minus 3? And I'll give you 2 options. One of them is correct. Okay, 2 possibilities. One of them is correct. 9 minus 3. The first one, A, is 15. B, or the second one, I won't even show it to you. What will you choose, A or B? You would choose B. Why? Because A is impossible. 9 minus 3 cannot be more than 9. Minus 3 means it has to be less than 9. So once you show it impossible, the other is correct. Here's the point. Now think. You didn't have to see that number. You will still choose. You know, there's a question that somebody has asked here. Why believe in God if you cannot see him? You didn't see, still believed. Still you thought B was right. In other words, there are many things in life we can easily believe, even without seeing. You don't have to have what is called empirical evidence, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. No. If you make a logical argumentation or a reasoning in which only 2 possibilities, God exists, God does not exist, agent, no agent, And if one is impossible, then the other one becomes possible. You don't have to see it. Sherlock Holmes, long ago, a great detective, these are his words. Actually, he's a fictional character, but the words are correct. How often have I said to you that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So if it was statistically impossible that even one cell was synthesized by random chance, and it would have required 10 to the power of 99 billion miracles or impossible events, then the truth is that an agent did it. What grade would you give it? I gave it the same. It's this on the same column. So I gave it 9 out of 10. So just a few more minutes and then we'll have our Q&A. Let's take a break for just a few seconds. I hope you're writing down your questions. I hope you wrote down all the grades that you gave each column. Let's do the grading now. This is how I graded it. So they are my grades. I hope you have your own grades and you can put them down like this. Column 1, I was 1. Column 2, remember it shifted out so it became 0. Column 3, 8 and column 4, 9. So now we're going to do a little calculation. We will put these grades on the top of the page like this. For A is 1, for B, against A and against B, the numbers. And then we're going to look at it in 5 different ways. I will just do one and then we will go quickly through the other so that we don't take time. We compare the 4, okay? And when you compare the 4, it will be that the greater number wins. So compare the 4. For A, 1. For B, 8. So which is the winner? B is the winner. So theism wins. Believing side wins. Now let's go to against, and that's all we will do as a real calculation. The rest you can, if you just write this down and do it, you'll find which way it goes. You compare the against A and against B, and in this case, when it's against, the lesser number wins. Against A is 9, against B is 0. So obviously 0 wins. Actually, if you look at these 4, you will realize that if you do any of those 4 columns, the answer becomes very clear. Can you see this? Theism wins all the time if you have these numbers. So, have others also done this? Yes. And here are some quotes from scientists. And I'm going to quote a few and then we will have a Q&A. Here's what Albert Einstein said. In view of such harmony in the cosmos, which I, with my limited human mind, am able to recognize, there are yet people who say there is no God. But what makes me angry is that they quote me for the support of such views. In other words, Albert Einstein is saying, don't quote me as a scientist to say there is no God. Einstein agreed with Spinoza that he who knows nature knows God. That's because the pursuit of science in studying nature leads to religion and God. How about Charles Darwin? This is what he wrote in the book Origin of Species. The first statement is from the Origin of Species. There is grandeur in this view of life with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator. In one of the editions, he put those words by the Creator into a few forms or into one. In the others, he leaves out the words by the Creator, but he leaves the word breathed. So if it is breathed, then that word is straight from the Hebrew Torah, the book of Genesis. Here's another statement by Charles Darwin. This is when he's looking at the whole universe. Impossibility of conceiving this immense and wonderful universe as the result of blind chance and necessity. When thus reflecting, I feel compelled to look for a first cause having an intelligent mind, and I deserve to be called a believer, a theist. By the way, Charles Darwin was a church-going believer. He was trying to be a good scientist, but in his heart he was a believer. He was trying to show that the theory of evolution is scientific. But we will see that tomorrow. But here he says he deserves to be called a believer. Anthony Flew is one of the greatest philosophers in the previous generation. He died about 7-10 years ago. For 60 years, he was a complete atheist. And as an atheist, he would fight against the idea of God. In fact, one of his earlier write-ups was the most reprinted article in the whole of philosophical literature for the last 50 years. It was against God. But finally, at the end, remember that statement I was making? Go where the argument leads. Somebody asked him to do that. And when he did that, he agreed there was God. Here's what he's saying. Matter cannot produce conceptions and perceptions. So at the level of reason and everyday experience, we become immediately aware that the world of living, conscious, thinking beings has to originate in a living source, a mind. The mind of God, a vision of reality that emerges from the conceptual heart of modern science and imposes itself on the rational mind. Notice what it does not say. It does not say it emerges from the conceptual heart of some religious book and imposes itself on a blindly believing mind. No, it says it emerges from the conceptual heart of modern science and imposes itself on the rational, thinking, intellectual mind. The stuff of which physical reality is constructed is mind stuff. This is from George Wald, a Nobel Prize winner in physiology. It is mind that has composed a physical universe. Here is Stephen Hawking, arguably one of the greatest scientists that we've ever had. I believe there are three: Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and Stephen Hawking. All three finally agreed there is God. Isaac Newton was he was a believer right from the beginning. Albert Einstein, when he looked at it carefully, he realized that there has to be something out there. Here's Stephen Hawking. Here's the second sentence on the screen. You still have the question, why does the universe bother to exist? If you like, you can define God to be the answer to that question. Stephen Hawking. If we do discover a complete theory, it's called the GUT, Grand Unified Theory, which is the holy grail of science today, especially physics. If we come to that, he says, it should be in time understandable in broad principle by everyone, not just a few scientists. If we find the answer to that, answer to what? The question of why we and the universe exist. If we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God. The ultimate triumph of human intellectual attainment is to know the mind of God. So here's the conclusion. Big and long, I agree, but this is a strong base we have to set, my friends. And so we did take time in forming the premises, and that's why it took so much time. So based on the evidence, facts, and reasonable logical thinking, the existence of the supernatural is valid and makes the better sense of the two. Therefore, the existence of God rather than the non-existence of God is a rational, credible claim. We'll go with Socrates, who said, go where the argument leads. And so I'll end, if I were an attorney in a court of law and you were the jury, I would say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here are the arguments and the evidences. I rest my case. So that's the end of the presentation, and now we go to question time. Just a few comments, and we will start with the question that I already have, and then we'll go to your question that you have for today. And by the way, let's ask questions relating to the topic of that day. If we have other questions, they may come up but they may be answered later on because we're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff. Remember, we have 17 sessions. We've finished just one. So you all have asked many questions, and we will address each one sometime during the 15-day seminar. We will start today. Every question, please note this, every question is based on a prior idea called an assumption. If the assumption is correct, then the question can proceed. If the assumption itself is wrong, then the question must be either discarded or be changed. Example, you can't ask a question, for example, this is a question of an assumption. You don't turn to a person and say, have you stopped stealing? Think, have you stopped stealing? That question itself has labeled him as a thief, because if he says, I stopped, then he was a thief before. And if he says, I haven't stopped, then you're still a thief. So the question itself is based on the assumption he's a thief. No, you mustn't put an assumption already inside there, otherwise you've labeled it. So sometimes the assumption forms the real question. So in this case, the real question should have been, have you stolen? Because if he has not stolen, then how can he stop stealing? So questions must have an assumption. Sometimes you have to look at that. And they should be settled first. At times you should look, in other words, this is what I found. At times we should look for the right questions rather than looking only for the right answers to the questions you have. There was one person who told me, I don't swallow everything. I question everything. So I said, really? He said, yeah, I question everything. So I said, do you question your question? Oh, why should I? So I said, here's why. Because if you don't question your question, then you cannot say you have questioned everything. That's number one. And number two, if you don't question your question, then you may have swallowed something without question. No, you have to not question. Don't make an assumption. Your assumption is that you have made everything into a question, or rather you have questioned everything, but you have not. So clear the assumptions first. So sometimes you must look at the right question first, because if you ask the wrong question and even get the right answer, you're still on the wrong direction or path. Some of your questions, by the way, I've looked at, do have assumptions, and we should consider them very carefully. So please don't mind the comments on the assumptions, because we want to clarify the questions as much as possible. A clear and focused question is easier to answer and also easier to know if it has not been answered. So some of you have asked nearly the same questions, and there are three that recurred, and we're not going to answer them right now, except for one. Here are the three. How can a loving God allow evil, pain, and suffering? Because the features appear to clash, they are contradictory. We're going to answer that now. But the other two, sometime, here are two. God punished some immediately and harshly, while others were treated leniently. Therefore, it appears God is unfair. If God knew Adam would sin, why did he place the tree in the garden? And there were so many different ways in which the same question came. This seems unreasonable. In other words, we are saying there is something contradictory, unfair, unreasonable. These are questions we have. We should address them, my friends. We must not treat them as if they should not be asked. I'm glad you asked them, and we're going to start with one and watch out for the others during the Q&A period. And if we have not asked them, ask them, and we will go through them. So evil, suffering, and God. And we are into the Q&A period right now. So when I finish this, we will have your questions. Evil, suffering, and God. We first of all stated that this argument cannot be used to throw away the existence of God. We can't use this. But the question still remains, how can a loving God allow so much of pain and suffering? And that also, he is almighty. In other words, he can do anything he wants. So he can do anything he wants and is loving, then how can we have all this pain and suffering? So here are 5 ways in which we will look at it. Number one, since we are dealing with the supernatural, in other words, we are dealing with something that is more than natural. For example, almighty, all loving. So we're not dealing with what humans are doing. So the correct way really would be to look at it from the supernatural angle. In other words, has this God told us anything in which it might explain? It doesn't answer all the questions, but some might be helped. Number 2, God is not only almighty and all-loving, which we agreed to, okay? He is all-knowing and also all-wise. He knows every fact in the whole universe. And he is the only one who can put 2 and 2 together like nobody else can. So now think very carefully, my friends. if a top specialist in a certain field, first of all, comes and tells you, I think this is the dose of medicine you should have, what are you going to tell him? No, I don't think so. No, he knows the stuff. He's a specialist in that. So we listen to the person who knows. He knows everything. We do not. So how can we who are ignorant question the one who knows? So if he is all loving and almighty, which we agreed, then we should also agree that his other characteristics are that he is all knowing and also all wise. So it is not really fulfilling, but it's logical. We cannot question. That's number 2. Number 3, this God, if we say he is all loving, then the question of love comes into the picture. True love requires freedom of choice. Tell me, how much really would you think that a doll loves you if you just, twist the key at the back and make it say, I love you the whole day long? No, you made it say, I love you, then that's not love. It must say it by itself. In other words, the freedom of choice must be there for this person to say, I love you, and also for the same person to say, I do not love you, I will not listen to you. Only then love is really true love. In other words, true love gives freedom of choice. Without that, the response is not love, not real love. It's automaton or forced or coerced. So with that, humans misuse the freedom. That's what the record says. And because of misusing the freedom, principles were brought into the human race that were self-destructive. That is the key for evil suffering, not God. Yes, he could have stopped it, but he could not because of his love, or did not because of his love. So that's number 3. Number 4, the evil and suffering is temporary on this earth. That's also the claim. There's going to come a time when he will wipe them off completely. Wipe them off completely. No more evil, pain, and suffering. So yes, we suffer today, but not tomorrow, because that's what he said. So looking at it from the supernatural angle, this is temporary. Time is coming. He will wipe it off, and wipe it off permanently. Number 5, when he wipes it off permanently, he takes all the sufferers from this earth to a place called heaven. And there he will compensate us 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 times over. Every sufferer on earth will be compensated. You suffered badly, I'll make it good to you. You suffered unjustly, I will make it good by 1,000,000 times over. And not only then will we praise him for giving us what he did, but for giving us more than we deserved. Look, there is evil, pain, and suffering. Nobody disputes that. But when you look at it from the supernatural angle, then we recognize all these 5 points. And if we recognize these 5, then yeah, we still bear the suffering. And it's not nice. It's vexing. It's horrible. But it at least gives us a little chance of a hope that there is beyond the evil and suffering something that we can look forward to. So I've answered this one, and that's all we will do as the written answers now, and we will throw it open for any question that you may have. Has any question been typed in or spoken in or whatever?
Yes, we have one question that came through. Sorry for the delayed response.
No problem.
Yes. So we have one question here, and it says, I've heard you say there are contradictions in every religion. Can you please give one example, at least from Sikh or Islam only?
Okay, can you just say that a little slowly?
Okay, sorry. Yeah. I have heard you say there are contradictions in every religion. Can you
the first line again? I didn't get the first few words.
Okay. I have heard you say
Yes.
there are contradictions in every religion.
Yes.
Can you please give one example, at least from Sikh and Islam?
Okay, like I said first, whenever we ask questions as an inquirer, we should look at both. We should make two theories. First, we should make two theories. Do not go directly into answering, because we have to find out the weight of evidence in any case. So this is a good question. Yes. So let's make two theories. Theory number one, there are contradictions in Sikh as well as in Islam. So we must also make the other theory, that there are no contradictions in the Sikh and in the Islamic religion. So are we clear on that? Whoever the questioner is. Are you saying, you have to say it now. That's the way we will address everything, every question that comes in. We make two theories. So theory number one is there are contradictions. And we're specifically mentioning Islam and Sikh. So we must now say there are no contradictions in any of the statements posed by either Islam or the Sikh religion. Is that the stand? So can we ask the individual who asked this? And remember what I said earlier about asking questions, we have to take away the assumptions. First, the assumptions have to be removed. So is it the assumption that there are no contradictions in the Islamic faith?
I think we can still put questions in the chat, or you can put up your hand if you have a question, so we can have a bit more of an interactive session during this time. I see one hand up, so I would call Mr. Kweku Afram to ask his question now.
Can they answer my question? Because I haven't answered the question. My question was, can the person who asked this question make the theory and stand by the theory that there is no contradiction in the Islamic faith writings or in the Sikh writings at all?
Great. It came in as anonymous, so that is the difficulty with tracking who sent that question. So if the person is still here, I would appreciate if they can still send the response anonymously. I would read it out, but if they don't mind, they can put up their hand or type in the chat.
Okay, so it's okay because the person didn't respond. This is how we always do it, so that we make the theory. If we say that there is no second theory, that there is no contradiction, then there is no question actually. So when we clarify questions, we should have both the theories there. One theory is that it does have contradiction, the other theory does not have contradictions. But we could not get both because the person is not responding. So that's okay, because sometimes it's difficult because these are not the usual way in which we deal with it. We usually ask a question, expect an answer, but I don't do it that way. I ask you to commit yourself. Then when the answer is there, you will realize that you have to change or I have to change. You know what I mean? Then the question becomes clear. So I'm going to make both the theories right now. I'm saying that Sikh and Islam, we'll just do with one right now. Islam has contradictions in the Quran. And the other theory is that there are no contradictions in the Quran or the Islamic faith. So now we will look at both. Are there contradictions? Yes, there are. For example, I'll give you one example, and that's all we'll do with right now. And if you don't mind, this is not, well, I did mention this right in the beginning, so it could be a good question. Muhammad is considered the perfect man. That is a claim. In the Quran, it says, God has forgiven your sins in chapter 48 of the Quran. And in chapter 93, it says God had to correct your error. So if he had sins and errors, he cannot be perfect. So there's a contradiction. So when you put those two together, there's a lot more, by the way. But here's one clear one. If you say you're perfect, then you cannot have sins and errors, because sins and errors are the things that make you not perfect. So if you say you're perfect, then you should not have. But in the Quran itself, like I've quoted you the Quran, chapter 48 and chapter 93, it does say that you had sins and also you were in error. So I've given you one example offhand.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. There was someone who put their hand up. I think it was Mr. Afram, for a question. So I think we are ready for you now.
All right, Doctor, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking and very deep analysis and presentation in terms of the existence of God. I want to pose the question, and I believe that most of us...
a little slowly so that I can speak a little slowly.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is that based on experience, based on something that you experience, if, the examples in the Bible that we refer to, to say that, the likes of Abraham, the likes of Moses had a personal experience of God. They interacted, they spoke. Paul had that encounter, he spoke.
What's your question?
So my question is that if based on experience, because I think that is one of the things that we are scared of.
Just a question, please.
Yeah, so my question is that based on experience, yes, can one argue the existence of God based on experience, that we experience in the way Abraham, Moses?
Yeah. So is your question, let's make it simple. Like I said, when you ask a question, we should come to the point of the question, then the response can be had. So is your question this: can a person base his claim of God's experience on, or rather God's existence on his experience? That's your question. Excellent
Exactly.
question. Yeah. So here's how we look at that. Again, we must make two theories. We base it on experience, and we have to base it on something other than experience. So let's look at the word experience like you have mentioned. I have an experience that, or somebody had an experience. You mentioned Abraham. Abraham had the experience, so he could say there is God.
Mm-hmm.
What would you then say to a person who does not have that experience?
So that is the question.
Yeah. So in other words, to him, there's no God. So will you allow him to say there is no God? That is the point.
Yeah,
So
that is his experience. Yeah.
So in other words, if we base it on experience,
Mm-hmm.
billions of earths should be allowed to say there is no God, because they've not had that experience that David and Paul and Abraham had. So that means it's a small, it could be for that individual, but it is not an explanation. It could be one explanation to that individual. But you cannot apply to somebody else, because if the person did not have the experience, you should allow him to say there is no God. In other words, if you didn't have an experience, you should now say there is no God, because I didn't have that experience, because the argument is experience. So if you are basing it on experience, only some people should be able to say there is there is God, and the others should not be able to say there is God. So we fall then into the position that very, very few on planet Earth, of the billions of planet Earth, will say there is a God. But God is not confined to a person's experience for his existence. His existence is not at all related to whether he gave you an experience or not. His existence is totally separate. Remember, one of the arguments was that he is separate from what he creates. So in other words, an experience can be one example. In other words, it can form one part of the evidence, but it cannot form the evidence, because even that one part has to stand logic and reason and evidence. So my experience can be an evidence to me, but not to somebody else. So good. Yes, to Abraham, there's God. But if that's the only way we are going to say it, then it will not work in the world, because so many people don't have that experience. So we have to have something more than a personal experience. Secondly, when we look at experience, remember, a person may have experience, and today also we will see it, that people who, I shouldn't say don't have an experience, they have the experience on the opposite side. I'll give you an example. I worked in the emergency room as a physician sometime, and so there was this guy who came in, and he suddenly asked me, what religion are you? Now, nobody talks about religion in the emergency room. Then I realized something was very different about this guy, and so he challenged me. He says, I need your religion first before you can treat me. So I said, fine. And I told him who I was. And then he said that in his experience, and he was, by the way, he agreed that he was from the Church of Lucifer, Satan's church. He was, in fact, an associate priest in that church. So he fully believed that. So he told me this, in my experience, Lucifer is God. So now if we take your basis of experience, we have to tell him, yes, you're correct, Lucifer is God, because that's your experience. So shall we agree to that? If we agree to that, then we are caught, because there can be two experiences that are completely opposite and contradictory, and we have to say yes to both. So therefore, we cannot have experience as the arbiter or the thing that divides us. We have to have something else. And like we said, the three things are evidence, reason, and logic, only these three. And that's why we went through all this time trying to establish that. But what you are asking and saying is at another level, which is very valid, because just knowing that there is God, none of the religions ever say that's enough. Not Hinduism, not Islam, not Buddhism, not Christianity. You should have an experience. Then that is valid. But we're not talking about that now. Now we're just asking, how can a rational thinking, scientific mind acknowledge there is God? And for that, we need only three: evidence, reason, and logic, not experience. Good question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else has any question? Please feel free to ask your questions.
You know, I will agree that these are not the usual topics we discuss, so there may not be much questions. We take it all for granted. But I'm trying to rattle your minds a little bit so you can start thinking, because there are many people out there who have these real questions. And so if we have some part of these basics, we will be able to answer them, and we'll be able to be strong in our own foundation. So even if there are not many questions, that's okay. Later on, there'll be many other questions on the other topics. But if there are any, I'll be happy.
Yeah, one just came through the chat, and yes, and I think the question is, what particular things made Lucifer angry against God? And also, I think he's asking, why did God give authority to Adam to name all these animals or all the things he created?
Okay, it is not on the topic we discussed right now. Good questions. And if you don't mind just sending the questions to me, I'll put them in the long list and we'll answer all of them during this 15 days that we have together. So let's wait for this to the point where we agree that the Bible is what you're supposed to look at. We have not come to that yet. We are still struggling with if there is God. So this question, like I said, this question assumes that the story in the Bible is correct. But right now we haven't established that. What if the Buddhist scripture is correct? Then you can't even ask this question. What if the Hindu writings are correct? Then you cannot ask this question. So, like I said in the beginning, you become a neutral inquirer, not a Christian inquirer. So first we become neutral inquirers, ask neutral questions. And then when it comes to recognize what the Bible is real and it can be established, then we bring in all these questions in the Bible. So please go ahead and email me or text me these questions. I'm going to put them in a line, in a full list, and we will make sure in the 15 days we'll answer or address at least every single one. Good questions.
Thank you very much.
One more. Is there any other question?
No, there's none coming through at the moment.
I'll notice also one more thing in the questions, and this is not just with your group, it's all over the world. I've gone all over the world now, speaking mainly on secular university campuses, and very often the question begins with the word why. Why this or why that? They are questions, but I would suggest to you the why questions are some of the most hazy and nebulous questions because we are not addressing the why to the correct person. I'll give you just an ordinary example of that. If you ask me, why did that guy eat only half the mango? What will I tell you? I'll go and ask him. Don't ask me. So the why question should be addressed to the person who you are talking about. For example, if you say, I'm just giving you an example, by the way. I'm not telling you not to ask. I'm just saying, think about your question. If you ask, why did God allow Adam to name? Then I will say, go and ask God. The why must be addressed to the person who's doing it. Or you can say, does the Bible tell us why God asked? Then we can look into the Bible. But if you just say, why did God do this and why did God do that? We are not focusing our question. And I'm asking us again, learn how to focus. Learn how to think through the things. So when you ask the question, why? Remember, those are the most hazy and the toughest question to answer. Why? Because we're not asking to the right person. If you ask me why I ate only half the mango, then I can say I ate because there's a reason. But if you ask why did that guy eat half the mango, then I cannot say it because you have to ask him. So when you ask the question why, and I don't mind you asking, please go ahead and ask, don't stop, but recognize that whys are not easy questions to answer anytime. So what we will do is we will shift the why to does either the Bible or does the Quran or does the Bhagavad Gita or does the Dhammapada or does that answer the question, not why itself, okay? So just throwing out to everyone that this is the way we'll do it so that it gives us a focus of how we're getting the answer or whether there's an answer at all. Because if we cannot get to the person or the source from where we get the answer, then the answer becomes redundant and we can't really answer the question fully, at least. So tomorrow we're going to look at evolution. We have done now the question of whether there is a God in terms of rational thinking, rational scientific thinking, not believing religion thinking. Rational scientific, yes, there is. At least the weight of evidence is on that side. Now we're going to ask the question of evolution, and I hope you all can come. We'll start on time, and we'll have a good discussion on evolution. 2 things about evolution. Number 1, its basic fundamental idea, and number 2, is it a real scientific theory? That's what we're going to look at tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, someone just put their hand up.
Yes.
Yes. So I think it's Mr. Smith. You can go ahead and ask your question.
You want me to say? Bible. I can't say.
Hello. Please wait so I do the translation for Dr. Pandit.
Okay.
Okay. So go Bible. Question. Yeah.
Bible. Amayati say. Nyankopon de na tie na bo Adam. One ye nipa udi kan obo no. Na de na ema nyame ye den anase de na oyema Adam hu say ampa onu nyame na bo no Adam no.
Okay, so what he is asking is that from the Bible, we are told that God used the sand of the earth to create Adam. Now, what did God do to illustrate or to show Adam that he was his creator? If I understood your question right.
What is the question?
So the question is, what did God do to let Adam be aware that he was creator as God?
No, I didn't get. What did God do to tell Adam what?
That he was his creator.
He was his creator. Okay. Yeah. From the Bible, we are not given that. But we do know that God came to him every evening. In the evening of the day, he would come and speak to him. So we can deduce that Adam also would have asked this question, where did I come from? Like we all have that question. We don't ask it because everyone tells us where we came from. All right. Somebody told me that this person was my mother. Somebody showed me that this person was I don't know whether my father actually was my father. I still don't know. But I trust the people who I am with. And so if they had not told me that, I definitely would have asked for example, every child who is adopted, who is told that they are adopted, always ask this question, who is my parent? Who is my real parent? Therefore, I cannot imagine that Adam and Eve did not ask, where did we come from? And God would have told him, I got you. In fact, he didn't tell Adam and Eve. He told all of us that he is the creator of everything, of the whole earth. And he is the one who gave us the Bible. And in the Bible, he says how he created. So he didn't have to tell Adam in so many words in the Bible. It's just a deduction we make. And the deduction, I think, is very reasonable because we would have asked if we were there. And if we asked, God would have answered. And he has answered us. When I ask, where did I come from? He tells me where I came from. So naturally, I think he would have told Adam, face to face, I created you.
That's fine. We don't plan to go beyond 6:30. So I would ask that if you have any questions, I think we are about rounding up. But I have one last question and a comment. So there's a comment from someone, or like the person asked to be kept anonymous, and it's that if we cannot ask the questions why, then the promoters of this program might have misled us, as we were made to believe that you would have answers to all our questions in relation to God. So that's the comment. So I think you would have to explain what you mean by not answering questions pertaining to why, or questions that begin with the word why. The last question, and that's from me, that's my personal one.
Let me finish that first.
All right.
I don't think I ever said don't ask. In fact, I said please ask. But all I was saying, the moment you say why, we have to focus that question. Only then we can get a reasonable answer. That's all I said. And I prefaced, or I rather enlarged on it by saying, this is not to say you must not ask. You must ask, because they are real questions. But recognize that when we are limited in the way we answer it, we should recognize that limitation. That's all I say. When we, for example, I mentioned also, if we are going to ask, why did God do this? The better way to ask that question is, if you're a Christian, to ask, is it in the Bible? Just like this person just now asked, is it in the Bible? Then we can answer that. But if you just ask, why did God do that? Then you are making it so broad and so hazy that anybody can answer anything and you cannot say it's right or wrong. That's why I say when you ask the question why, please try to answer it in such a way. But that does not mean you should not ask. There are a whole lot of whys that I got from you all, about 20 or 30 questions. Many of them are why. And I said we will address every single one of them. So nobody has been misled. Nobody is trying to say that it will not be answered. They will be addressed. But remember, as human beings, we have only 3 billion neurons in our brains, not more than that. So we are limited in the way we can say anything on earth. When we recognize that limitation, then we are on the same wavelength. And we realize that it's a reasonable answer, but we can never have absolute proof of anything that we say. Nobody can have, not even the person who asks.
Okay.
Your question?
Yes, it was. How do you explain to someone how the spiritual non-existence impacts the physical, the existence?
How can the spiritual non-existence?
So the things we cannot see, let me put it that way, because
yes,
impacts the things that we do see.
Oh, excellent. Here. The question is really good, because there's something known as empirical information, that which we can see, hear, touch, and feel and taste. That's called empirical. The other is called deductive. We look at some evidences and we deduce from that, and it comes a logical reasoning that brings us to that. Now, what we have said today, for example, I'll give you an example. We have said a logical deduction of scientific information and logical philosophy will bring us to an idea of God. Okay? So let's say that. That is not empirical. God is not empirical. So how does that affect us physically in the empirical way? This is how we exist at 3 levels. We exist at the level of the physical. We exist at actually 4. We exist at the 2nd level of mental. We exist at the 3rd level of social. And we also exist at the 5th level of spiritual. So when we deal with spiritual, it affects all the other 3. And when we deal with social, it affects at least 1 and 2. And when you deal with mental, it definitely affects even 1. So we do not live in only one plane. And one plane definitely affects all the other. Let me give you one example of persons who never believed in God. There were 2 journalists who were atheists, and they said, we would like to take a journey through the continent of Africa. And this was about a decade ago. And they walked, this is how they went. Walked is not taking a flight or planes. They walked through from one village to another. And when they came back to their own homeland, they wrote their experiences, and this is what they said. You can make out, while you enter a village, you can make out whether these people believe in God. So, why? For example, the cleanliness. Immediately, the rows of hedges that were made, the fields that were made, the drinking water in that village, the way they helped one another, the way they talked about one another. In other words, the fact that they believed in God, and they said this was right across the whole of Africa. Wherever they went, this was a clear-cut generalization that any village that had God as its mentor, as it were, a non-physical mentor, a non-human mentor, that had an effect in their physical activities in the village. So in other words, it does have a solid effect on how you live. Remember once I mentioned about whether if there is a God, then we will have to ask him to tell us how to get there. Yeah. How will we get there to nirvana unless he tells us? How will we get to heaven unless he tells us? Then how? By a certain way of living and thinking and acting in this life. So my idea that there is a heaven, that is a hope in the future, will allow me here to shift my activities, my ideas, my whole behavior in line with that. So it does have a solid, huge effect on how you live on earth.
All right. Thank you very much, Doctor. And that would bring us to the end of today's program. We are continuing tomorrow throughout to the 10th of April. Tomorrow's topic will be, is evolution scientific, or the fundamentals of evolution? So kindly ask your friends and your family members to tune in for tomorrow's program as well. We thank everybody for making time to join us today, and say have a blessed evening. Goodbye.
Bye to everyone.
For making time to join us today, and say have a blessed evening. Goodbye.
Bye to everyone.
For making time to join us today, and say have a blessed evening. Goodbye.
Bye to everyone.
For making time to join us today, and say have a blessed evening. Goodbye.